いらっしゃい。僕の基地にようこそ。今度醤油ラーメンの作り方を。何？英語でHello everyone, my name is Jasper and welcome to my kitchen. When you ask someone, what Japan is famous for, they'll probably say one of the following things. Their technology.
Farmers from Shikoku Island are very proud of these plants.
Their anime culture.
人間になんだかすげえ見られてます。先生、人間が僕らに名前をつけてます。
Their organized crime or yakuza.
見てください、何するんですか。
お嬢さんいい加減にしろよ。一体いつになったら出てってくれんだよ。
Or their food. And today I'm going to show you how to create one of Japanese cuisine's most famous dishes, the ramen. So without further ado, here are the ingredients. The first ingredient we'll be using is soy sauce to create the base of our shoyu ramen or soy sauce ramen. This sauce is created from fermenting soybeans, grain, brine, and a mold called Aspergillus oryzae, or in Japanese, koji. This sauce originated in China in the 3rd century and is likely spread to Japan through Chinese Buddhist monks in the 7th century. This sauce is also likely introduced to the Western world in the 1700s by the Dutch East India Company. The next ingredient is rice wine or michu. This, although a wine, we will not be drinking as it has a whopping 1.5% salt content and is used purely for cooking. The next ingredient we'll be using is mirin, which is a rice wine that is very similar to sake, but with a lower alcohol content and higher sugar content. But what we have here is not mirin, but mirin fuchomiryō, which means mirin-like seasoning, which contains the same flavor, but none of the alcohol. The next ingredient we have is beef bouillon. Although traditionally we will have to simmer bones for upwards of 2 days, let's face it. Next we have dried kombu, which is a type of edible kelp. This we'll be using with our soy sauce to create our dashi, or soup stock. Here we have ginger and spring or green onions to further enhance the deliciousness of our dish. Here we have pork shoulder, which we will be braising to create the chashu topping for our ramen. Here we have dried seaweed, which we will also be using to top our ramen. Although it is very difficult to find the correctly flavored bamboo shoots for our shoyu ramen, we can create something very similar by using these Chinese spice oil pickled bamboo shoots. Eggs, pretty self-explanatory. These will also be topping our ramen. Various spices if you prefer an extra kick in your ramen. And of course it wouldn't be ramen noodles if we don't have the noodles. And that's all of our ingredients. With that said, let's start cooking. We shall start with the eggs. The eggs will be soft boiled and then left in the fridge with a soy sauce based marinade. This will give our soft boiled eggs that distinctive brown color. So to create our soft boiled eggs, first we're going to get a pot full of water. And thanks to the magic editing, I now have a pot full of water. This we will start with the boil. Now that the water has started boiling, we're going to turn it down to a rapid simmer. And now we're going to drop in the eggs and let it sit in there for around 6 to 7 minutes. We're just going to do 6 eggs today. While the eggs are boiling, we'll be preparing the marinade that the eggs will go into. So the marinade will consist of approximately 5 part soy sauce, 1 part mirin, and 1 part water. And yes, that is a shot glass. you gotta use every resource you've got. So we have 1 part water, 1 part mirin, now this is a concentrated mirin sauce, so we won't be using exactly 1 part, approximately 50% of that. And 5 parts soy sauce. And there you go, there's our marinade. Now that the eggs are done boiling, we'll take them out and submerge them in really, really cold water for them to cool down. Like so. We're gonna let them sit in the water for approximately just a minute or 2. We just want them, oops. We just want them cool enough such that we can peel them with our bare hands. Now that the eggs are cold enough, or not hot enough that we can handle by hand, we're going to simply peel the eggs. And leave them in the marinade for a few hours. Depends on how heavy you like the taste in your eggs. And yes, I realize I am terrible at peeling eggs. And once again, with the power of video editing, I have completed peeling the eggs. Although the last one came out a bit wonky, but that's okay. It'll still taste great. And we're gonna let that sit in the fridge for around 5 to 6 hours. Now that the eggs are sitting in their marinade in the refrigerator, we can start to prepare our dashi, or soup stock. So the dashi requires us to first take our kombu, our dried kelp. As you can see, it is crusted with salt. We're just gonna take 1 piece and first soak it in a pot of cold water. Just like that. Now we are going to let that sit for about 15 minutes before we add some heat and let it boil. Once we add the heat and it boils, we will be adding our beef bouillon. Now that the kelp has been soaking in the cold water for about 20 minutes, we can take it to the stove and heat it up. While that is happening, we shall prepare the other things that will be going into our stock, namely some green onion and ginger. So, for the ginger, we'll simply be cutting slices of this. Just a few slices. Just this will be enough. And for the green onions, we only want to use the green section instead of the white section, or else our soup will be slightly too spicy. So let's tear off all the parts we don't need. So here, just screen section, like so. So we'll be adding this to our stock. Now that the kombu has been boiling inside this pot for a little bit, we can remove it into a bowl or something. Here it is. I'm gonna need a bigger bowl. Should work better. Slightly, hopefully. We will remove the kombu. Let it drip for a little bit. And there we go. And this is actually edible, so if you'd like to eat some kombu, just drizzle this with some soy sauce, garlic. Makes a great appetizer. Okay. Now that that is done and our stock is going, we can add the ingredients that we just cut up earlier. Give them a quick rinse, and in they go. Next, we add our bouillon instead of our pork or beef bones. For this, I'm gonna add, let's see, 2 cubes, because we don't want the taste to be that strong. Most of the taste is not coming from the stock, it's coming from the tare, which we'll be making later on. And there goes the cubes. Stir around a little bit. Lower the heat. And we're gonna let that simmer for maybe an hour or 2. And we'll be back with that. So now that the stock or dashi has been sitting here simmering for the last 3-4 hours, we can turn off the heat. And our stock is complete. Next, we shall make the tare, which is basically a soy sauce, I suppose, that you add to the dashi to create your ramen soup. So the next thing we will cook is the chashu, or braised pork. So here I have my my pork shoulder, and here inside on this side we have the bone, which we do not want. We mostly just want this side. So I'm gonna make a cut right here. And just gonna cut through all of that fat. Right there. Okay. So this we do not need, which we will set aside. And this is what we want. And during the cooking process, since this is pork shoulder, if we cook it the way we want to, just like this, this will fall apart. To prevent that from happening, we have cooking twine, which we will be using to wrap this pork shoulder up to make sure that it does not fall apart when we cook it. And once again, video editing magic to the rescue. So here we have our cooking twine, and I'm just gonna get a big long chunk of this. Whatever extra we have after we can just cut off, no big deal. Alright. So, if you haven't had ramen or chashu before, chashu tends to form a rounded shape, kind of like this. So that's our end goal. We want to wrap it so it stays in this shape while it cooks. So here comes the fun in quotation part. So I'm going to wrap the pork around this way first. Since this side is the easier side to grab. Just like so. And now I'm going to take this, stick it under here, pull it through, and here I will start my first vertical loop. I'm not going to cross over any of these strings down here so that I can achieve this rounded shape. So we're going to just come around to the top, loop through, and pull it up. Just like this. Okay. Now we're just going to go through every single one of these. Well, first of all, let us pull this side taut. Okay. And we're just going to go in this crisscross kind of pattern until the whole thing is wrapped. And I will be back once that is done. Alright, now that we have wrapped up our pork shoulder, we can put it into a pan. Let's get rid of that. Add in our ginger and green onions. And again, we're gonna have our 5:1:1 ratio of soy sauce, mirin, but this time instead of water, we're gonna add our cooking wine. So, we're just going to let this slowly pour out of the bottle. Come on. Okay, so there. 5-part soy sauce. 1 part mirin. Take even slower. Good. Good. Okay. 1 part mirin. Right on top of that meat. And 1 part cooking wine. Okay, so now repeat that process until the pork is about halfway covered, and we'll be back when that happens. Alright, now that the meat is pretty much swimming in soy sauce, mirin, and our rice wine, we are going to add some water to it so that it is almost completely covered, and then we will toss it on the stove. Now the good thing about making chashu is that whatever is left over of this sauce becomes your tare, so you don't have to actually make an extra sauce for your ramen. So, to the stove we go. Alright, now the pot is on the stove. We are set for high heat. We're gonna let that boil. Once that happens, we're gonna turn it down and let it simmer. Alright, now that the pot is boiling, we have turned down the heat and we must skim off all of this yummy stuff. And then we're going to let that simmer for about an hour or so. Okay, after a night of slow broiling, the meat is now delicious and we have wrapped it up to keep it fresh. Here are the sauces that were in the, or that was used to cook the meat, which we will use as a base for our Shoyu ramen. So for now we're gonna set this aside and we'll be working on our bamboo shoots. So here I have the leftover sauce from the eggs, and here's just some cold water. All we're gonna do is take the bamboo shoots, soak them in the water to try to get rid of some of the original spices that were in here, mostly the spicy oil. Just gonna stir it around. So what's really interesting about these, first of all, in Japanese these are called menma, which is not the original name they were called, or originally called shinachiku, which means literally Chinese bamboos. Now these are not a product of Japan, they are actually a product of originally Taiwan, and these were exported to Japan, and during this time Japan tried to create their own, manufacture their own bamboo shoots, and they tried to call it shinachiku, which was the same name that Taiwan was exporting this product under. Therefore, the Taiwanese government protested, saying that, hey, you know, this is our product, this is the name we gave it, don't give that name to your product, which is obviously inferior to our product. Therefore, Japanese changed the name and now it's widely known as menma. So now we take the soaked bamboo, I'm just gonna throw it into our sauce over here. And we're just gonna let that sit for about 5 to 10 minutes, not very long. We don't want these to be super salty, or else they will destroy the balance of the dish, if you know what I mean. Alright, so just gonna leave there for a few minutes. So something I forgot to mention, in the year 1895, when Japan won the first Sino-Japanese War, Japan ruled over Taiwan, and it was during this time when all of these native Taiwanese foods were introduced to Japan. And export of this product happened after the end of the Second World War in 1945, when Taiwan gained its freedom again. Alright, so we're gonna let that sit for a little bit. Alright, now that the bamboos are done submerging in the egg sauce, I suppose, we have pretty much all the components we need. Here we have our dashi, or soup stock, which is made from kelp and our beef bouillon. We have our Chashu sauce, which is the sauce we use to cook our meat in this case soy sauce, mirin, and rice wine are the main components. And this will become our tare, or our flavoring sauce for the soup. Here we have our meat, which wraps in saran wrap to keep it fresh. Here we have our eggs, right there. Bamboo shoots, which we just did, and green onions for topping our ramen. So, what are we missing? Right, ramen, noodles. We're missing our noodles. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Alright, so here in my hand I have a plate of the ramen we'll be using. As I said before, there are all sorts of different kinds of ramen. Some chefs prefer their thick noodles, some chefs prefer their thin noodles. I personally prefer my thin noodles, so see here. There we go. Relatively thin noodles. And so while we're waiting for the water to boil, I've also been heating up our dashi, the soup stock in the back, which we'll be adding a little bit of water just to water it down slightly. And we'll be back when the water starts boiling. Okay, now that the water is rapidly boiling, we'll be cooking our ramen using a very special tool. This. So what this is basically like a metal cage to keep your noodles from flowing out and into the pot. And basically it serves the purpose of making it easier to pick up all the noodles. But there's also one very important part of this utensil which we will be seeing very shortly. So, just turn that down for a bit. Take my noodles, drop it into the cage, just like that, and dump the whole thing in there. Wiggle it around, make sure it's completely inside the pot, and we're just gonna let that sit. Now, chefs also will sometimes ask customers how hard or soft they would like their noodles. I typically like mine slightly harder, so I'm gonna leave my noodles in there for just about 5 minutes. We'll be back when that's done. Alright, while we're waiting for our noodles to finish cooking, let us prepare the rest of our soup. So, here, nope, not that one. Oh, where did I put it? Oh, here it is. So here we have our dashi, our tare. Dashi is over here in that pot. So how much tare to add to this bowl is completely personal choice. If you want the soup to be saltier, to have more taste, add more. If you want it to be lighter, you add less. Personally, I do about that much and fill the rest up with our dashi, or stock soup. Just like so. Okay. Take our chopsticks, mix it a little bit. Okay. Now, the noodles are ready. And here comes the fun part where I'm probably going to fail miserably. So, let's do this. Okay, and we're back. Please excuse the mess. Now that the noodles are done, let me get a towel here so that we do not burn the tabletop. Here's our pot of noodles. So remember I said the cage has another function? So once we take out the noodles, in order to not make the soup any lighter than we wanted, what ramen chef would do is take this and keep whipping the noodles to try to get the moisture or the water out of the noodles before they put it in the soup. So obviously I am not a trained ramen chef. Do this at your own risk. I would like to say that if you do not feel comfortable doing this, just taking the noodles out, putting it in the colander, and just doing it that way is perfectly fine too. This is purely for comical effects. Here we go. Yeah, close enough. I think we got most of the noodles. There we go. Okay, now that the noodles are mostly dry and on the floor, we'll take our noodles and simply dump it into our bowl. Okay, let's get that out of the way. Now that our noodles are on our bowl, we're just gonna take our chopsticks, mix it around a little bit so the noodles absorb some of the soup. Alright, now we're gonna go back to a close-up view so we can finish our ramen. Okay, we are back. This looks beautiful, and let us put on the toppings and finish it. So, let us start with the meat. Now the meat is still wrapped up in our cooking twine, so we'll be cutting that off first. Look at that. Yum. Okay, so let's cut off the cooking twine. There we go. Unwrap our meat. Ooh. So apparently tighter than I thought. Which is, I'm not sure if that's good or not. We'll see. We'll find out. Okay. Come on. This is the best part, I swear. Oh. Don't worry, the cooking twine is completely safe to eat. I mean, it's just like what, cotton? Pretty much, yeah. You're not gonna die if you eat it. But don't quote me on that. I assume no responsibilities. Okay, so we have a few more strands here and there. Wow, these are digging deeper than I thought they were going to. Okay, so there we go. Let's get rid of that disgusting mess. And let's cut our meat into slices. So we're going to get rid of the outer layer first. Now of course, you can have your chashu thick. Oh, look at that. Look at that. You can have your chashu thick or thin. Personally, I prefer thin. So we're gonna slice it just about, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch thick, something like that. And let's just do 3 slices. Okay. So we have 1, 2, and 3. So that's our chashu. Set that aside. And I'm gonna rinse this board out and I'll be right back. What button should I? Okay, we are back. While I was rinsing out the cutting board, I also dumped out a little bit of soup just to make sure it doesn't overflow. So next, we'll have our eggs, or egg. So here's our egg, which we left in the soy sauce and mirin sauce, I suppose, for about a few hours. We're just gonna cut that in half. And look at that. Beautiful. Okay, next we have bamboo shoots. Just a nice, generous amount. And before we put on the spring onions, I forgot to mention we have these toasted seaweed. So I'm just gonna slice the packaging apart. And obviously one of these sheets is way too big for our bowl of ramen. So I'm just going to take a sheet out from the packaging. Here we go. Obviously way too big for it. Just gonna fold it in half. And half again. And I'm just gonna use 2 of these quarters. 1 and 2. Okay. lastly, we just need some spring onion to top off our ramen. Again, this time, if you like a little bit of kick, you can use some of the white part on the bottom. I prefer the green part, so I'm going to be using most of those. Just like so. Yeah, you know what? Let's add some white part for good measure. Why not? Okay. So here we have our green onion. And lastly, for just a little bit of kick, this is let's see, 7 flavor spice. It's a Japanese combo of basically red pepper and a few other spices. Paprika, I think it's also in there. Black sesame seed, orange peel, white sesame seed. Oh, there's also a little bit of seaweed, but this gives it a little bit more kick and a nice. Let me just break that seal. A little bit of kick and a very, very nice aroma. Just generously sprinkle it over. Alright, and there we have it. Move this away. So we have a nice glamour shot. Let's see, spoon in, chopsticks on the side. And there you go. Our homemade shoyu ramen is complete, or as you would say in Japan, kanpekida. That's beautiful. We'll be right back. Alright, so now that we've finished this dish, and I couldn't help but take a few bites out of it, it is absolutely delicious. Let's talk a bit about how this dish came to be. So, ramen is most likely originated from China, in which there is a term for it in Chinese called Ramen, which is referring to the method that noodles are created by stretching it, folding it, and stretching it. And that is Ramen, which means pulled noodles. And these noodles are likely introduced to Japan in the early 1900s, and these shops are run by Chinese. And in Japan, obviously, since Japanese people don't quite like Chinese people, there was a term called Shina soba, which literally means Chinese noodles, where Shina means China and soba means noodles. And this time, Shina was a very derogatory term, and not very many people actually went to these restaurants to eat this Shina soba, which later turned to our ramen. But as more and more Chinese people start to, influx into Japan, this started to Shina soba became more common, though not very many Japanese people went to eat it. What people don't realize is that while this dish is very, very much Chinese in origin, we have our Chinese noodles, the chashu, the pork, the original braised pork came from China, or this technique of braising the pork came from China. Soy sauce is Chinese. I mean, the only real Japanese roots of this dish is the stock, which is made from kombu, which is dried kelp essentially. And this was because Japan was an island, and one of the easier ways to obtain salt was sea salt. And the easiest way to do that is simply through kelp, right? Kelp is submerged in seawater, it has lots of salt, we dry it, and then you get salt from it. So really, there wasn't much Japanese influences in this dish, it was mostly Chinese. But what made this dish so popular was actually World War II. Now you might be thinking, what the heck is he talking about? So after World War II, we have a lot of Japanese soldiers coming back from the war. And at this point, Japanese economy is not very good, as you can imagine. So people needed fast and cheap food for all these soldiers. And after World War II, Japan started importing flour, which was not very cheap for the war, but the US produced a lot of this, and Japan started importing these flour from the United States at a very low price. And thus, these Chinese shops making noodles could start to offer these dishes at a much cheaper price than they could before. And thus, this Shina soba, or ramen, started to grow in popularity among the lower classes, or I suppose lower and medium classes, as it became a very cheap source of relatively good food. But what really brought the ramen up to its legendary standards today is the instant noodle, which was invented by a Taiwanese-Japanese person called Momofuku Ando. Okay, he came up with, he created the Nissin food company, and he invented the instant noodles. Now, at the very beginning, instant noodles are actually a luxury item. Okay, like nowadays you can buy a packet of instant noodles for like 13 cents. They used to cost $6 or so per packet. It was not a cheap food, but then this boosted the popularity of the dish that inspired it, which is the ramen. And by around 1980s, ramen became a very, very big Japanese cultural icon and was spread throughout the world. And now even in the US, we have our own spin of it. Everywhere you go in the world, you can probably find a version of the ramen. So while this dish is not really inspired by any Western countries, the method of selling this actually was very interestingly. So these were shinasoba, or ramen, was originally sold in these little push carts, or like street stands that we see around hot dog stands. And when Portuguese Christian missionaries came to Japan, they brought along with them some musical instruments. One of them is it's called the charumera, which is very similar to like an oboe of some sort. And this was used to advertise the noodles, or the fact that the cart is there. So while the dish is not very inspired by many Western dishes, the reason it grew to its legendary status today is thanks to World War II and America. And originally it was sold using Portuguese musical instruments, which is very interesting. So while we're at it, let's talk about the different kinds of ramen. There are 4 main kinds of ramen. There's shio, tonkotsu, shoyu, and miso. And that's the order we think that these flavors came about. So originally we have shio ramen, which is very simply salt. Shio means salt in Japanese. And basically the soup is just a salt-based soup. Very much just like our dashi that we had, just kelp, sometimes a little bit of chicken or vegetables. And that's the earliest and simplest form of the ramen, or kind of ramen. Next up we had the tonkotsu ramen, which means pork bone. So what we have is we smash up pork bones, and then we boil them for a really, really long time until all the cartilage, it all comes out, and we have this nice white creamy soup. And tonkotsu is more famous in southern and mainland Japan, where the access to these pork, to pigs, is much more available. Whereas you don't see much tonkotsu up in Hokkaido, where it's really, really cold and you don't have much, it's not the right climate to have these animals around. So next, we have, to start the show today, we have our Shoyu ramen. This was created after soy sauce started becoming very popular in Japan. Some guy decided that, hey, I like my shio ramen, or salt ramen, but I like soy sauce too, so let's add some soy sauce to our salt ramen. That's what we get here. Lastly, we have our miso ramen, which which is actually relatively new. This was invented in Japan, in Hokkaido, which is the northernmost island in Japan, in around 1965. So Hokkaido is actually pretty famous for their miso. They have very many different kinds of miso. They have white, they have your regular, they have your red. Hokkaido miso has a very strong flavor, and they added it to their salt ramen, which then created the miso ramen. So depending on where you go in Japan, you get very different kinds of ramen because of what's locally available and what the people's tastes are. So next time you go to Japan, make sure you try out lots of different kinds of ramen. And one thing to keep a note: when you have ramen, you cannot, or I should say, you should not have it very quietly. Let's put it that way. In Japan, noodles are meant to be slurped, very loud, very loud. This signals to the shop owner that the noodles are delicious. And what you might think is very different from what we have here is that the noodles are actually the main star of your dinner or lunch. Actually, some people actually eat ramen for breakfast, but it is often frowned upon that if you leave noodles in the bowl but not soup. Okay, so just keep this in mind next time you go to Japan and have ramen. Slurp the noodles and eat the noodles. Yeah. So until next time, here's ramen. Delicious.